In 2010, Tron Legacy became the first sequel to be released more than 20 years after its predecessor, as Jeff Bridges had to wait 28 years to return to the grid. A rash of franchises were dusted off from 2015 onward, with Mad Max Fury Road releasing 29 years after Beyond Thunderdome, Blade Runner 2049 dropping 35 years after Blade Runner, Mary Poppins Returns landing 54 years after Mary Poppins in 2018, and Dr. Sleep coming 39 years after The Shining in 2019. But unlike the aforementioned films, Tron's cult following of self-described users has always been a little more niche, which is why it's taken more than a decade to receive any substantial news on a third Tron film. The fact that Tron had the longest sequel gap is appropriate for Tron's unique space and fandom. It's a franchise that's always ahead of the technological curve, and it always understands the power of nostalgia when it comes to blockbuster filmmaking.
Hey, who's that guy?
That's Tron. He fights for the users.
Even so, Tron is always fighting to be taken seriously.
Did anyone see the movie Tron?
No.
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 No. No.
No. No.
While the franchise is always going through fits and starts, there does appear to be a flicker on the grid in 2020 with the news of Jared Leto confirming a third Tron movie to be directed by Garth Davis. So on the 10-year anniversary of Tron Legacy, join us as we look back at the complete franchise from its start as one of the earliest CGI-heavy films through new reports on the third film. Who knows, by the end of this video you might be looking up how to make your own Tron costume. They're actually really cool. Tron came from the mind of writer, director, and animator Steven Lisberger. Lisberger's first film, Animalympics, was a two-part animated TV special commissioned by NBC to spoof the Winter and Summer Olympics as promo for the actual 1980 Moscow Olympics. However, the US ended up boycotting the Summer Olympics that year after Russia invaded Afghanistan, and the summer special never aired as intended. The combined movie did, however, receive a small theatrical release. Animalympics is noteworthy because many involved went on to make major films for Disney. For example, art director Roger Allers became co-director of The Lion King, and animator Brad Bird went on to make The Incredibles 1 and 2. But it was Lisberger who first landed at the Mouse House after Animalympics with Tron. Though Lisberger initially conceived of Tron as an animated film, Disney greenlit the project based on a test reel done by Lisberger that combined live action with computer animation. The concept of virtual reality as a film setting, thus combining live action with CGI, was novel at the time, offering a glimpse into the future of wholly computer animated cinematic worlds. But because 50 minutes of the film's runtime consisted of backlit animation on a soundstage, Tron ultimately only consisted of 16 total minutes of actual CGI. Still, many of Disney's own 2D animators refused to work on Tron for fear that computer animation was a threat to their jobs. So, the computer-generated look of Tron actually came from outside Disney, utilizing Alien and Blade Runner concept artist Sid Mead and renowned heavy metal artist Jean Mobius Girard to design the looks of the costumes, sets, and storyboards. Though Tron was revolutionary in regards to special effects, it was made with just one computer with only 2 megabytes of memory. You likely have more storage on your cell phone. The sets were covered top to bottom in black felt, and the colorization of the suits was actually traditional hand-drawn animation. But the computer-generated sections kept Tron from Oscar consideration in visual effects because computers were considered cheating at the time. Tron wasn't the box office bomb that many frame it as now, it just didn't capture audiences like the new visual experience is expected to. It earned $33 million at the box office, making back almost double its $17 million budget. However, it was its release date that likely softened its total box office. Tron was originally set to open in December opposite awards-hopeful movies and would have been the only family option in the winter. But Disney moved up the release to summer out of spite, hoping to dent the impact of a former Disney animator. Don Bluth, who worked on Disney's Robin Hood, Pete's Dragon, and Rescuers Down Under, had left Disney in 1979 to start his own animation company. His first original film was The Secret of NIMH, set to release in July 1982. Tron was moved by Disney to open opposite that film, and while Tron did gross more than double what NIMH did, it paled in comparison to other summer blockbusters of that season. In the end, Tron came up far behind E.T., Poltergeist, and Annie that summer. The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas ended up being the highest-grossing July release of 1982. So while Disney envisioned July would be Tron versus Bluth, it was good old Dolly Parton who upended the grid. Fittingly, however, new technology at the time afforded a second life for the film. As a franchise, Tron would benefit greatly from home video and the Tron arcade game. The coin-operated Tron game generated more revenue than the film itself, earning $45 million from coin playing by 1983. And while a movie sequel would take 28 years to complete, the arcade game already had a sequel in 1983, The Discs of Tron, which was one of the first games to attempt the 3D environment. Discs of Tron simulated the highlight-like combat scenes between Flynn and Crom and Tron and Sark. These scenes were actually the genesis of Lisberger's concept for Tron after seeing the early Atari computer game, Pong. Flying discs for combat was Lisberger's idea to have attacks without guns so that kids wouldn't emulate gunplay, something that carried over to the arcade games. The Tron games were introduced at the peak of arcade fever before the 1983 video game industry crashed from oversaturation. The classic arcade games would keep the spirit of Tron alive long after the 1982 film, and would also serve as the entry point for Tron Legacy in 2010. Like the original Tron, Tron Legacy went to a first-time live-action filmmaker, Joseph Kosinski. Kosinski's background was actually in architecture. A graduate of architecture at Columbia, Kosinski specialized in implementing high-end computer programs into architecture. This eventually led him into the commercial world and directing commercials for video games, which got him noticed by Disney.
He's different.
But it was his architectural background that informed the design of the film and the movement within the grid that excited the fans the most from the very first teaser shown at Comic-Con in 2008. It also made it the most expensive directorial debut of all time with a budget of $170 million, which eventually became $220 million after applying 3D conversions and marketing.
It's just a game! Not anymore.
While mainstream computer literacy had skyrocketed in the 28 years since Tron was released, the filmmakers didn't want to fill the script with RAM discussions or populate the film with internal internet ads and other inside jokes. Instead, they set out to build a complete internal world and society that had advanced organically in the time between films.
Disease? History. Science, philosophy, every idea man has ever had about the universe up for grabs. Biodigital jazz, man.
The sequel, starring Jeff Bridges in a dual role, Garrett Hedlund, Olivia Wilde, and featuring an original score by Daft Punk, earned $400 million globally. But because it only barely made its original budget back at the domestic box office, proposed sequels have languished for a decade. But like its predecessor, a cult following has emerged and fans have begged for a third Tron film. In 2020, 3 years after Kosinski described a third film as being in a cryogenic freeze, the Tron Legacy filmmaker has moved on. But there is life on the grid, with filmmaker Garth Davis winning over Disney with a new pitch and actor Jared Leto on board. Leto says of the project, "I'm struck with such gratitude for the opportunity to bring this movie to life, especially as both the original video game and the film affected me so deeply as a young child. The fact that I get to be a part of this new chapter is mind-blowing." There's no word on whether Bridges, Hedlund, or Wilde will return to the grid, and insiders stress that the film has not officially been greenlit. However, a director being attached is a step in the right direction for users to be granted to the grid once again, more than a decade later. Which iteration of Tron do you love the most? The original film, the sequel, or the video games? And what do you think the third film should focus on? Sound off on the film's legacy in the comments below.